So hi guys, so let's start with we learned about debugging and we learned about how variables values or how to define and all, and we learned about print statements, right? So now let's learn about blocks. Blocks are like quite interesting things that are kind of provided in Scala. So now let us try creating it. Now this is our main method. I just created a simple function. You can just drop it. We can create it again. So let's start with, so let's again, as I said, let's define x which is equal to say 5 and so where y is equal to say 10, right? So let us say I want to define, I just want to create another well, and I just want to say like z is equal to x into y. Let us say I want to have like some complex statements that I want to do with z, and just like x plus y by x into y. So let us say I just want my z complex to be something like so just like complex statement x into y by maybe like x plus y, or let's do this right into x into y, right? So let us see, you can write these expressions in straight, or else the best way would be I might even have some complex functionality, right? Instead of me writing this entire statement as a single line, I would rather recommend, because it is too difficult for me to debug, in the sense like say I want to know what is the value of x plus y. I want to know what is the value of x into y. Or let's do one thing. Let's try printing both of them. So one interesting factor over here, as I explained, if you just, I just want to re-explain it. Like if you put s statement over here, the value of z is, so you can just write $z. So that way it will take this variable. So all you need to just prefix it with s on the single quotes, then it can take the value of this, right? And the value of z complex is, right? And just $z complex. Now let's run it and see the value. Right, so the value of z is 50 and the value of z complex, where you have actually taken this value and it is turns to be 0. But I was really wondering why it is actually 0, because I was expecting that it should actually give me some decimal value. So when I say, so 5 plus 10 is like 15, 15 by 50, which should come around like 0.3, right? So that would be my expected value, but instead I got 0. Right. Well, I do know the answer why it is coming as 0, but I just want to see, or I just want to debug like what it could actually go wrong. So when I put a debug point over here, so I can just run it. Right, I can go to, so whenever I click on the next statement, I'm directly going over here. So I'm getting the entire result, but I'm not able to debug any statement. Let us say I'm writing even bigger complex statements, my entire execution ends up into a result. But I would like to see how each and every value is happening. Right, so then what I will do is, instead of me writing it into a single statement, that is when I can go ahead and create a block. So let me stop here. Right, and let's try to express this expression. I'll just comment it, guys, or you know what, let's do one thing. Let's leave that over here, right? And again, I want to reassign the same value, z complex, and instead of me writing it in a single statement, I just opened these curly braces and closed it. Right, now let's define, like within this particular curly braces, let's define a a variable a. Right here I'm specifying that the variable value is x plus y, right? And val b is equal to x into y, right? As you could see, it is throwing an error saying like reassignment to where. Okay, so let me just redefine to where. Now, even if you see, there is a error because it is expecting an int or some type over here, but we are not returning any statement. So the way a block works is your last statement, right? So what exactly you need to do, you just planning to do this a by b. So in a block, whatever be the last statement that you are writing, that value will be expecting over here. Previously, when I kind of, let us say, when I'm not writing this statement, since it's not returning any value, you are not actually putting a value in return statement. You are just defining a particular value. It is throwing an error. So now that this is a value where you are not assigning it to any variable, so it goes and it sets into J complex. Right, let us see how the values are. Let us see if there is any change over here, whether it gives us our 0.3 or not. Okay. Now let me play this. Right, I'm just directly running it instead of debugging. So again, it's 0. So now I just want to see, what is happening over here. Why it is not actually throwing 0? Is it because x plus y is executing wrongly or x into y is executing wrongly? Or what exactly is the problem? Right. So now let's get back into the debug mode. Yes, one interesting factor over here whenever I'm actually creating this block function. Now you could see, right, you go to the next step. Now you're seeing the value of a, which is 15. So your x plus y is actually working good. Right, now let us see if x into y has a problem. X into y as expected, 5 into 2, which is 50, which is also nice. But when I have done like a by b, now what is happening? So a by b value is turning to be 0. Right, so what exactly happening? So my a value was actually, so guys, you remember whenever okay, let me just rerun this debug again, because this is one interesting thing that you have to understand. See, this is a place where you could actually see all the live variables, right? So whenever a particular variable goes out of scope, then it would automatically vanish away from this place, right? So this is one interesting thing to find, like whenever we are inside this block statement, now I could actually see a, right? I could actually see b. Whenever I'm coming out of it, a, b are kind of gone, and what I have is like x, y, z, and z complex. So all the variables that are in this statement. Okay, so this is one interesting thing that you have to understand. The scope of all the variables that you created within the block statement will be within this particular thing. I'm talking about the variables that got created, like x and y got created over here. Even if I reassign a value over here, so then it would still remain the same, right? And right, so now let's go back and let's set up the print statement. So whatever happens in this set, it will goes off once the set particular value is kind of gone. Right, so now when I just play here, it's done and it is showing value wrong. Now one interesting thing is, okay, let's play it again to identify where the problem is. Right, now my Z complex is 0. So let us see what is the type of Z complex. Okay, yeah, so one interesting way of doing it is, let's click on this. Let's click Z. It is saying it is a type int. Sorry, Z complex, which is type int. But 0.3 is not type integer, it is a double. So first thing what we have to do is, let's try doing it. Let's typecast it, or let's explicitly specify that it is of value type double. So can just play. Right, now let us see if there is any change in this value. Again, I'm going into debug mode and I'm playing this. Well, it turned into double, but unfortunately it didn't actually give us our 3.0. The reason for it is, when I define a, I didn't even specify that it is an integer. Okay, so let us see what are the types of a and b. Okay, so now let's Yep. So let's debug the content, right? So when I'm doing this content, now A, right? Like now just try doing it here. Let us see the type of A. A is again an integer. And when I click on B, B is again an integer. So now we got the problem, guys, because both A and B are kind of typecasted to A, right? So this is an implicit conversion. Since I haven't said that it is a double or integer, now that both are integers, so any operation among the integers would end up in an integer, right? When I do A by B, which is like 15 by 50, and now since both are integers, it is expecting a value of type integer. Since 0.3 is not an integer, it will go to the nearest base value, right? So the nearest base value is 0. So it's actually throwing it's throwing a 0 value, right? So that's what we kind of identified, that it's because we both defined it. So what I can do is let us define one of the things to double, right? So when I assign it to double, so this is where the things would happen in a different way. Just debug that. Right, just play this. Now we got our z value to complex, right? It's 0.3 now, so which is interesting. Great. Okay, so now we got our results. So that is one good thing which you have to understand, guys. It's always so the implicit conversions would still work. But if you really want to know the exact value, if you really want to do it operations, I will always recommend to to define like what type of value you're expecting, so that your values and everything would work really fine, right? So if at all you want to make it like an integer, you just define it as an integer. Okay, so this would be the best practice, unless you're not certain of what type of variables. Or there are times where it could be anything. Where when we go with case classes, that is when you will understand that you might not. I mean, you prefer not to typecast any set. Instead, you will just take any variable, and based on the type of the variable, you will act on it. Okay, we'll go deeper into those details. And now what we have to learn is, like, we learned about blocks. Let us try something. Just like I created a primitive types like 5, 10 and all, I can even create a new object and set it to either variable or a value. Now one interesting thing over here, right? So when you go to basics, so this is the thing, right? Let us see if I can actually define a function as a variable. Okay, so how you do that? So now, like, I'll explain about creating a block. Now let us see if I can just create a function which will do the same operation that z complex is actually doing. Right, now let us say val some small func, right, which I'm just trying to create here, right, and it should take integer, right, because I need x and y to be passed. So let's call them as int i's, right, so I and z is of type again int. Okay, and the way you have to set your return statement is like, you are just passing this as a variable, and what you are specifying is like, yeah, let us take these values. Let's copy it over here. It's no longer x, it's no longer y, it's like iz, and so it is g, right? So now what I'm trying to do is, again, like, a is double, so it would expect a double value. Now let's put a variable, right? Let us say z func, so the value that a function actually is returning. All you need to do is, now that function is a variable, so it is, see, if you look at it, it's saying that it is a function type, and it takes two integers as input parameters and returns a double statement. Now click on func, you pass the value of x and you pass the value of I, right? And now let's put a debug point here to see the value of z func. Interestingly, yes, the value of g function is 3. This is it, guys. Like, it would still work, right? So one interesting thing is here I define it as a val. First, I would see if we can actually change the definition of function, or can we make it as a variable and can we redefine the function? Yes, the same rules apply. Whenever you define it as a val, you can just rewrite this function, right? So just go back here, rewrite the function, okay, and instead of a by b, or what you could do is like let us try b minus a, right? Now let's create. Now z function is again another variable. So what we can do is, yeah, let's set z function to again, like let's call this func guy x comma y. So this is one interesting activity, guys, and this is one of the reasons why I prefer debugging is more important, because the value of z function, the value of variable z func, let us see whether it will take b minus a into account. Right now that I have defined this func twice, right, and when it will happen what. Okay, let's click on debug here. Let's try it out. Now when you look at zfunc, the value of zfunc is 0.3. So that means it is not taking b minus a here, because this b minus a, this function definition, we defined it post this expression which is there in 23. So when it comes to the execution of gfunc, my func actually takes the definition of this set. Right, so now let us see what will happen when we execute the statement on 30. So when I execute it, now it becomes 35. Now this function value is actually taking the values which are assigned here. So this is the interesting experiment that we have done. That means we can even, like just like the way we are kind of reassign the variable values for primitive types, even for functions, you can redefine the entire function and you can set it back over here. So that is all, guys. So this is how you can define a function. You can write return statements also here. It would still work, but don't write return statements in case of blocks. So it will not allow you in case of blocks. So there is no return statement. It always takes a value 1. So only in case of functions you can write if statements and stuff. So that's why you can write return statements here. Okay. So we learned about creating a method. Like main is the way you have created a method, and now you can write a function, and you can even pass the function. You can use this function as a variable. In fact, interesting thing is you can even expect. So let us try creating a method, right? So sample method. So far, right, we learned about like you can pass an integer, blah, 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 and all. So let us see if I can actually pass a function. So what will be the function which I'm passing it over here? Will it really work? What I can do is I can create one parameter just like the function definition, where I'm specifying that it is a function which takes int, comma, int, right? So let's, and what it is returning, it is returning a type double, right? So let us define this as some function, right? And this is how the definition of the function is. It should take 2 integers. And now let us take both the values, right? The value of x and value of y, which you want to pass it to that function. So let's call this as I, right? And z. Oh, sorry, z is of type int. Now what I'm returning is, here I'm returning a simple thing. I'm not doing much activity. What will be the function that you are just passing? And what will be the variables that you are just passing? I'm just returning the same, right? Instead of unit, I just need to make sure it is double because I'm returning a double. Okay. Now let us see whether I can pass whatever be the function that I just created. Okay, let's, yeah, so now let us create a new value, right? So where just says z from a method, right? So uh, guys, so the difference in a function, whenever you want to use function as a type of a variable, you have to define it within a method, right? And so if at all you want to create a method which can be reusable across many things, then you need to prefix it with the definition. Now I just created a method. What I'm saying is, along with the argument, my argument could be a function. And let us say I want to create an argument where I can pass a function of type which takes two input parameters of type integers and returns a double, right? So now let us call this method this dot sample method. And in sample method, so I just created my func class, so I'm passing it, and similarly x and similarly y. Okay, all I'm expecting is, now let's assume that, okay, anyway, it's returning double, it explicitly, or you know what, let's make it explicit. Let's call this as an, now again, just run our debugger to see the value of z from method. Oh, sorry, I think I ran it. Okay guys, so let us see when I'm actually creating a debug, right, it is actually giving some enclosure over here. The reason is just like, so though the return statement, you can write it over here, but ideally what it is doing is this main method, it is returning the value over here. So whenever you create any function variables, don't use return statement. This is my bad. I said we can use it, but yes, apparently it's not. You should not use the return statement over here. So because it is returning b minus a for main instead of executing it. So don't write return statements whenever you want to define a function within this set. Okay, so now, yeah, so in methods, yes, you can really define it. Now I'm passing this function method. Let us re-debug and see whether the error got resolved. Yes, guys, the error got resolved. And again, like the value of z from method is again 35. So whatever we are expecting from z function, right? So that is all, guys. We learned about creating a function, creating a function, creating a block statement, which is over here, right? A block statement, creating a function which takes variables, and creating a method which can actually take a function as one of its variables. So that's all, guys, and that's all for today. And we'll learn about, so in basics we kind of covered most of the topics other than classes and stuff. Classes and all we will learn it after this particular session. Okay, thank you guys, and that's all for today's session.